Hello, everybody. Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. My name is Nona Bidashka. I am the EU Affairs Manager at EIT Urban Mobility, and I will be chairing this session for the next hour or so. This is really an opportunity for us to share the latest report that we have been working on urban vehicle access regulations. And we will bring two of our cities, two case studies that have contributed to this report and for which we are very grateful. And then we will move into a conversation with three of the experts that have also brought a lot of input to this process. So again, we thank them for being here and for supporting this study. Before we move into the content, I would just like to give the floor to my colleague Yvan Le Petit, who is coordinating this work at EIT Urban Mobility.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and also good afternoon from my side. Really happy to be here this afternoon. So I would just like to kickstart this webinar with a short introduction about the report that we're going to launch today and what this webinar is actually about. Yeah, the idea of today's discussion is actually to launch our latest report. You can see the cover here on the screen. It's a report we've been conducting over the past months with the support and collaboration of Abertis Mobility Services, but which we're very grateful and really excited to launch it today and to share with you the main insight. So we structured the discussion today as basically a way to kind of share with you the main findings of the reports, and then of course you will have the opportunity to look for yourself into the report. But what you can expect in this report are recommendations focused on tangible examples, some best practices from diverse cities, two of which are here with us in the webinar today, about diverse forms of UVARs, so being low emission zones or congestion charging, or also changes in public space. For this webinar, and I will briefly touch upon it in my next slide, and for this report, we actually really leveraged the expertise of EIT Urban Mobility's network and gathered perspective from both public and private sector experts. Just here at this stage, an indication, if you have questions during the webinar, there will be some time for it at the end. We have in this Zoom webinar a Q&A box. So we really encourage you not to use the chat, but if you have really questions on the content, to use this Q&A box. And just another quick remark, we are also recording this webinar, and the webinar will be available on EIT Urban Mobility's YouTube channel in the coming days. So if you want to share it or watch it again, this will be possible. Quickly, as mentioned, who did contribute to our reports? As you can see, more than 15 organizations have contributed. We organized back in June, actually, a structured discussion, an expert workshop online to gather perspectives from both larger companies, startups, but also experts, institutes like the European Commission, for instance, but also quite numerous cities, since this topic is highly relevant for cities, as you can see. So basically, this will be my last slide, just to let you know that the report right after this webinar will be available on EIT Urban Mobility's website. So we have a publication section. Right at the end of the webinar, I should be able to share with you in the chat the link to the report so that you will be able to access it, and it will be publicly available on our website. So that's it from my side as a word of introduction. Now I'm happy to give the floor back to my colleague Joanna, who will then move us on with the next presentation.
Thank you, Yvan, for all these details. I would just want to introduce now Jordi Ramirez. So he is joining us from the Barcelona City Council, and he is going to speak about the work that they've done in the city to prepare for a low emission zone, And especially he will focus on the work around the public consultation and the process to engage citizens and relevant stakeholders in this scheme. So Jordi, please, you have the floor.
Okay, good afternoon to everybody. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon to everybody. My name is Jordi Ramirez from the City Council of Barcelona. And in my presentation, I will introduce how in the City Council, how we try to engage citizens and stakeholders to different measures that the City Council delivers, putting as an example the case of the Low Emission Zone of Barcelona. First, I would like to introduce a few facts about our city. For example, our city is about 1.6 million inhabitants, and it's located in a particularly location which is between the mountains and the sea, as you can see in the photo in this slide. Another important thing to analyze is that the city covers only 100 square kilometers. So the density inside the city is very high, about 16,000 people per square kilometer, which we are the leader one in Europe, as you can see in the graph below. And that's very important in terms of air quality and pollution. Here you can see some air quality data, only to introduce the problem. As you may imagine, here we have the problem to achieve the EU limit values for many years, even for NO2 and PM10. As you can see in the graphs above, during 2020 and 2021, there was a big decrease of levels because of the pandemic. But as you can see below, in last months of 2021 and now this year, we have seen that levels are increasing. So there is a risk that without effective measures like a low emission zone, we will increase the levels to the previous, to 2019 and so on. And here you can see the monitoring stations in the city where they are located, only to introduce that. The Barcelona Low Emission Zone was introduced in 1st January 2020, and very quickly I will explain a few things about that. It covers an area of 95 square kilometers that covers not only the city of Barcelona, there are other cities in the surroundings that are included. In the map, the part which is scratched is the one that is inside the city of Barcelona. And in that area, we have been, some vehicles are being restricted according to the environmental levels that the central government of Spain delivered a few years ago. Currently, we are affecting the most polluted vehicles, which are the ones without any label. And to put an example of a result of that measure is that we have seen that the vehicle fleet has been renewed a lot. Here you can see that in March 2017, they were about 20% of vehicles without any label. And if you compare to December 2021, the number of vehicles without any label decreased to 3–4%. And now in September 2022, it will be about 2% more or less. Some of these key points I have mentioned previously, but only to highlight that the pandemic, the COVID, impacted the implementation of this measure, and made it difficult to analyze and to single out the benefits and the impact of these measures. And also, as you may imagine, in the city, not the low emission zone, it's not the only measure that it has been implemented. There are other ones that complement this, and like the superblocks strategy that you may know, and many others that have one of their objectives is to reduce pollution from traffic. So in order to implement this kind of measures, it is mandatory in the city to implement a public consultation and a participatory process, which is a kind of meetings that they are scheduled between citizens and stakeholders and the city council to promote an increase of consensus and to be more confident in order to deliver this kind of measures. A participatory process has 4 phases that you can see in this slide: into the information, the debate, return, and monitoring phase. And anyone which is affected with the measure can take part in that process. Usually, in the sessions, they came from residential associations, trade unions, political parties, so on. These kind of public consultations or participatory processes are useful to solve a possible lack of alternatives delivering this kind of measures, giving the right exemptions, authorization, moratoriums, raise up public acceptance, and to meet the goals for the city council without disadvantaging any stakeholders in a disproportionate manner. However, sometimes this is not enough, because as you may know, here in Barcelona, we are just facing a legal case against the low emission zone. And as a consequence, we have organized a new participatory process for a new low emission zone that will fulfill the new Spanish climate change and energy transition law, which is a strong legal framework that we have in Spain since last year. And it's very useful in order to deliver these kind of measures. Very quickly, here you have the example of the participatory process for the low emission zone in 2020. Here is the calendar. It goes from May 2019 to December 2019. It covers the 4 phases I have mentioned before. And this is the list of stakeholders that took part in that process. They were about 5 debate sessions where people came and were able to answer these questions, these 5 questions that were given in a leaflet that you can see below. And that was very useful for the city council to know what the citizenship expect or what the citizenship want to include in the municipal ordinance of the low emission zone. Here you have 4 photos of the process, the different sessions to debate. And maybe the most important result of that process is that a wide list of permits were created in order to try to not affect any stakeholders. It's so difficult, but we try to do that. And finally, well, there is a wide range of permits, daily permits for people with reduced mobility, emergency vehicles, etc., etc. If you have any question, I can answer later. And this slide is only to summarize the pros and cons that in my point of view has a participatory process. As a pros, they improve governance, they give greater social cohesion, better policy and implementation decisions, and improve consensus within people, stakeholders, and the city council, which is very important. But at the same time, different cons: monetary cost, staff time, newsletter, leaflet, communication campaigns, etc. Non-monetary cost, which is the time contributed by participants in all the process. And finally, the risks. Here we have the risk of reputation, stress, uncertainty, conflict, and so on. And that's all, I think. It covers 10 minutes exactly. So.
Thank you, Jordi, for this exemplary good behavior. And also for this very interesting presentation. I took note especially of the first part where you show the data, because this measure didn't come from thin air. It just came from the need to address air quality, air pollution. So I think there is a strong justification also in looking at the data for this type of measures. Indeed, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A box. We will take questions towards the end of this discussion. Now let's move on to our next presentation, which is coming from London. Ian Catlow is working in the London's European office here in Brussels. And he will be speaking about, well, the famous congestion charge, the transition of the low emission zone to an ultra low emission zone in the city, and how this all fits with the mayor's strategy. Ian, if I can please ask you to show your slides. Thank you.
Yes, yeah, thanks very much, and good afternoon. Let me see. So I'm just okay, I seem to have a slight technical problem. Okay, can you see the screen now?
Yep, perfect.
Great. Great, okay, thank you. So yes, as Luana said, I'm working for the Mayor of London and Transport for London. I'm just going to run through our vehicle access restriction streams in London. So just to give you a bit of context, I mean, many of you will know London, but it's quite a big area. If you look on the map there on the left-hand side, Greater London, fitting more or less within the orbital M25 motorway, has an area of around 1,600 square kilometres. We have a directly elected mayor, Sadiq Khan, who's responsible for the whole area and for Transport for London, which is our integrated transport authority, which either operates or authorises most of the modes of transport within London. As you know, the London Underground, we contract out the 9,000 or so buses, and we run the railways within London, and we are responsible for the main roads, as well as authorising taxis and river services and one or two other things. So, and it's Transport for London which has to deliver the Mayor's transport strategy. The latest version of that dates from 2018. And I've just set out the sort of key areas that it covers there. I mean, in terms of the principles which we try to apply, we have an approach which we describe as healthy streets. So having a street design which is welcoming to people, is inclusive and safe and accessible and pleasant to be around. That kind of approach to design actually then influences the whole approach to your transport strategy. Of course, we have to make the best use of the existing resources that we have. And in some cases, that means actually reducing road space for vehicles and increasing space for walking and cycling and leisure activities. We still have a big air quality problem in London, in common with many cities, and so that has to be a key priority. And we have a zero carbon target now of 2030 to address the climate emergency. Now, in turning that into more tangible targets, our headline aim is to ensure that by 2041, 80% of all trips in London should be done by public transport or walking or cycling. And you have to bear in mind that there are something like 27 million trips a day carried out in London by the 9 million or so people who live there, and another sort of couple of million who come in to commute in normal circumstances. And now the modal share of soft modes is probably around the mid 60%. So we still have some work to do to change the modes of transport in London. And we want people to be active. We also have to address the health issues. We want people to get at least some level of activity during the day through their travelling. And ultimately, we want to reduce the amount of traffic in London by 10 to 15% over that same period. Now, coming on to air quality, which of course is driving a lot of what we do, then it's still the case that families live and work and kids go to school in areas where the experts tell us that the air quality is just unhealthy. And indeed, according to our figures in 2019, poor air quality contributed to the deaths of around 4,000 people in London, and worsened the quality of life of many, many more. You can see from the maps on the right-hand side there that the situation has been improving over the years. But as you can see from the color coding there, so as the color moves from blue to green to yellow to red and then to black, that indicates a worsening of air quality. In this case, this is of NO2 concentrations. And of course, those concentrations are worse amongst across the road network, and it's road traffic, which by far is the biggest contributor to certainly to NO2 concentrations, and that's what we have to address. But coming on to our actual schemes, I mean, the first one I wanted to mention was the congestion charge that most people will know about, and that of course was introduced to address congestion and not specifically air quality, although it did have some air quality and CO2 benefits as well. But the congestion charge only applies to the very centre of London, the 21 square kilometre part that's highlighted in the middle of the map there. Currently, you have to pay £15 a day if you want to drive in the centre of London, and that applies Monday to Friday during the day, and also now to weekends and bank holidays to part of the day. And that has had a clear impact on congestion in London. The roads are still very busy, but when you consider that when we first introduced it in 2003, the population of London was probably about 7.2 million. As I said before, now it's about 9 million. And so the fact that the roads operate at all is I think a result of our strategy and of schemes like the congestion charge. The second element is the low emission zone. Now, this was originally introduced in 2008, applying to the whole of the Greater London area, and was just targeting heavy vehicles. So lorries, buses and coaches, and it's since been extended to vans as well. This applies 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. It's not a ban as such, but the charges for those vehicles which don't comply are indeed meant to be dissuasive. So as you can see, depending on the size and age of the lorry, then it ranges between £100 a day to £300 a day. And as a result, that's driven a big improvement in the quality of vehicles on the road, and you can see the compliance rate is very high. The vast majority heavy vehicles on the roads comply with the standards, which are now up to having been tightened over the years, Euro 6 for diesel vehicles. As a result, we've seen reductions in black carbon emissions and particulate matter and NOx as well. So that, amongst other things, has done its job in improving the air quality. Now, what we've done more recently is now actually apply an ultra low emission zone initially to the very centre of the city, the same area as the congestion charge. That was in 2019. That's the yellow area right in the middle of the map there. And since October last year, that ultra low emission zone has applied to the pale green area. So that's the whole of inner London. So obviously a much bigger area, and it doesn't apply just to heavy vehicles, it applies to all vehicles, so passenger cars included. As you can see from the table there, the standard there is Euro 4 for petrol vehicles and Euro 6 for diesel vehicles. The low emission zone, looking at the heavy vehicles, there still applies. So the heavy vehicles don't need to pay any extra, but that still applies to the whole area. And as I say, it's been going for just about a year now, and now our modelling is suggesting that we would see, as a result of that, another 30% reduction in NOx and some small improvements also in PM 2.5 and in CO2. Now, I've titled this slide "Flanking Measures." So I mean, they're flanking in the sense that they support the implementation of the restriction zones I've just mentioned. But I mean, in fact, they are all key parts of the Mayor's transport strategy. One thing that's particularly relevant has been scrappage schemes. So we did make around £60 million available, targeted at those who will be most negatively affected by the introduction of the ultra low emission zone in particular, and that took around 15,000 of the oldest vehicles off the road. We have increased over the years. We increased bus services a lot, particularly in the centre of London, but elsewhere as well. We've spent a great deal of time and resource on putting dedicated cycle lanes into London, what we call cycle superhighways crossing the area. Legible London, the picture in the middle there is the detailed maps that are now all over the centre of London and spreading out as well, which give pedestrians a much better idea as to where they are and where they can get to actually encourage them to walk when as opposed to taking a vehicle to move around. Of course, we're supporting the rollout of electric vehicles, so our electric vehicle implementation infrastructure strategy is trying to promote the installation of up to 60,000 charging points by 2030 to support electric vehicles. And we have other innovations like the Oyster card and now contactless bank cards, which make it very easy to use the transport system. And then finally, just moving on to our future plans. I mean, we calculate that in order to meet our net zero target, there will have to be a 27% reduction in vehicle kilometres driven on London roads, and which is why we've just consulted on expanding the ultra low emission zone to the whole of London from next year. But as you can see, with the congestion charge, with the low emission zone for heavy vehicles, with the ULEZ for passenger vehicles, then this is quite complex. And in our view, we now need to look at having a more sophisticated form of road user charging, which would enable us to replace all of those schemes with a single, simpler and fairer system over the next few years. And as part of the consultation on the implementation of a London-wide ultra-low emission zone, that's what we've started to ask those questions of Londoners and get in their views. And that consultation just finished. So we'll see what the result of that is, but that's kind of the direction of travel. So I hope that gives you an idea of what we've been doing in London, and very happy to contribute to the discussion.
Yeah, great. Thanks a lot, Ian. Again, a rich presentation showing us not only the direct benefits on air quality and fleet renewal, but also some co-benefits, right? And interesting to see also the last slide, the flanking measures, sort of the carrots which come with this sometimes perceived stringent stick of urban mobility, urban vehicle access restriction, right? So I would like to invite our other guests. So we have with us Xavier Querol from the Spanish Research Council. We also have Bonnie Fenton. She comes from Ruprecht Consult, but she's also representing the Civitas Reveal project. And of course, last but not least, we have Carlos Fuentes from Abertis Mobility Services. So thank you all for being here. Let's move on into, I think we have more or less 30 minutes of conversation. So I would just like to start with you, Xavier. So asking you to reflect a bit on the two presentations that we had from the cities. And you're an expert in atmospheric research and air pollution. What is your view on this city perspective, and how does your work, your research relate to it?
Okay, thank you very much for inviting, and thank you very much for these two interesting presentations. So the two cities are, the two presentations have shown different approaches. London is very well known for the congestion charge, the low emission zone, the ultra low emission zone since decades. And Barcelona, it's starting, not starting, here, the city has implemented already the low emission zone, and I think they are doing quite well in spite of the problems with the court that we are having, okay? But there are two levels, okay? So London is much more developed, okay? And the strategies here in Barcelona, for example, we have also the super block strategies, which is again restricting vehicles, and this will add a lot to the low emission zone. So our idea in the air use project, we received the Green City Prize from the DG Environment, and in this project we say that the UVAR are key tools for improving air quality, okay? The low emission zone is necessary, but will not solve the problem, okay? Because even Euro 6 in the ultra low emission zone, we need Euro 6D to abate NOx emissions. So there are highly polluting cars, Euro 6. But in our opinion, the most is the congestion charge. This is the most powerful tool coupled with the low emission zone and especially the good distribution, the urban freight distribution, okay? So I will stop here, but let's say that in London and in Milano, they reduced 35% of vehicles especially in Stockholm, by applying to large areas, because applying to small areas, you can have the boundary problem, people going around, and then we always support less money, less expensive, but a lot of square kilometers. Thank you.
Thank you, Xavier, for bringing this very important point that low emission zone is just one part of access restricting, and to tackle other objectives as well, you need to go for maybe more ambitious schemes. Let me move on to Bonnie now. So as I said before, you represent the Civitas Reveal project, which is a Horizon funded project that has been doing a lot, I think, to increase knowledge knowledge exchange on this topic. And by and large, I think it also worked with several cities, right, to prepare the ground for an access restriction implementation or communication. Can you perhaps share a bit how does the experience in Reveal relate with the two experiences that you heard just now?
I can totally just relate to and see the things that are being talked about both for London and for Barcelona. There were a lot of points that came up. Just to put this into context a little bit, or where I'm coming from with Reveal, it's a 3-year project that's just coming to an end now. And we've been looking at basically trying to understand, to systematize, to categorize a little bit access regulations, just so people can understand what we're talking about. And all of the examples that have been addressed so far, we have 3 categories of types of measures. So we talk about regulatory measures, which is things like a low emission zone, where you say you set up a rule, regulations that allow what you are or not allowed to do. The other one is pricing aspects. And of course, the London congestion charge is a perfect example of that, where you say, if you pay a certain amount of money, then you are allowed to access it. And the third one, we call our spatial interventions. And that's also came up clearly in the example of Barcelona, particularly with the super blocks, that you simply change the allocation of the space in your city so that cars are not able to go there. So you simply change the space to make it physically impossible. So this was our basic structure, looking at these 3 types of measures. And underneath that, we've identified 33 at this point, building blocks, we call them. So the bits and pieces that you can choose from to put together. And you said yourself, the one that one's not enough, maybe you need to do different things. And this is sort of our idea within Reveal, is to support cities. And we are working with 6 different cities across Europe and beyond, who are currently in the process of putting in, or have already started putting in, their own access regulations. And our idea is just to understand the process and to help them understand what the bits and pieces are that might fit together well, and also to talk about the process. And part of that was what Jordi already mentioned with the stakeholder engagement. And there's a lot that could be said about that too. But so those are the 2 aspects, looking at what the pieces are that you can put together and how you work through the process of putting it all in place.
Great, thanks very much for this, Bonnie. Carlos, last but not least, you're coming from the technology side, and for people who will be looking at our report, this will become obvious that we're looking at all the facets of implementation of this innovation, right? So we're looking at research, we're looking at the city, we're also looking at the enabling technology for an urban vehicle access restriction. And your company is doing a lot of management of toll roads and infrastructure. How do you see the cases that were just presented right now?
Okay, hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And thanks also Jordi and Ian for the fantastic presentation and sharing the benefits of UVAR. Okay, in terms of AMS, Abertis Mobility Services, we are present in 10 countries worldwide, and we develop and provide urban mobility solutions for cities, okay, to implement UVAR systems like low emission zone and congestion charge schemes. What we have seen is that we are living in the century of cities, okay, and we have 2 big challenges in cities. Is the cities are going to grow, and we need to reduce pollution and fight against climate change. Okay, what we believe is that we need an integration between low emission zone and congestion charge, as it has mentioned, to tackle 2 problems. No? The first, reduce congestion and pollution and improve air quality. And second, this is important, is to convince the citizens to leave the car and move to use the public transportation. Okay. And congestion charge is not only to generate funds and incomes for maintenance and for improved public transportation. It's a tool to manage demand management in cities. Okay. That's we have seen these results in London, in Milano, and in terms of technology, what we have seen is that the deployments in most of the cities are based in cameras, okay, in EMPR cameras to vehicle detection and informing purposes. But the technology evolution is here. The electric vehicle is here. And there is a paradigm change, and vehicles are connected. And we are now using satellite technologies that are available, okay? In IMS, we are bringing cloud solutions for managing satellite technology and connected cars in the United States. And this technology can be moved and used in cities, okay? In order to implement a smarter solution to reduce the citizen acceptance challenge in the cities. One of the best benefits of using the satellite technology is that can work for new vehicles, old vehicles, and reduce the needs in infrastructure, okay? We don't need more cameras and enforcement, less cameras, I would say. And as an example, Milan is doing this job, okay? Milan is moving in that direction to implement technology using satellite for monitoring polluted vehicles.
Thanks, Carlos. Yeah, it is indeed the case that we have already the technology available that we need to implement sustainable urban mobility measures, not just UVARs, but it's not yet exactly replicated or scaled up or deployed everywhere. So that's why we have this type of meetings to try and bring together some successful examples. So looking also at low emission zones in particular, we've noticed in the report that their number has increased across the European Union, so by 40% between 2019 and 2022. So we have moved from 228 to 320 low emission zones across the European Union, which is outstanding. And I think this number will only continue to grow because people have expectations for more livable cities, for healthier air, and in general for better public spaces. So I just want to ask, in your opinion, what kind of guidance do you think is needed to facilitate planning and implementation? For example, foreign vehicle enforcement. So you mentioned the Milan example, Carlos. Maybe just to go back to you on this, what in your opinion is needed here?
I would like to point out four points. The first is the legal framework, what is essential. Legal framework is the base, okay? But at the same time, legal framework not only to implement low emission zone that is happening in Spain, but the legal framework is needed to implement congestion charge. Okay, we seen in Spain that they cannot implement because there is no regulation. There is a new sustainability law in progress in 2023 that will allow to do that. Okay, that's the first point. But in terms of also, it's a legal issue as well, is the monetary aspect, the funds, that the funds collected from these implementations must be allocated to improve public transportation, not to the general back of money of the city, because it's something that the citizen needs to understand. That's my point of view. Enforcement is also a must for national and foreign vehicles. But we know that there is no harmonization in terms of environmental budgets in Europe. Every country is different, the Euro class. So this is something that it's a barrier, and I recommend to implement, at least in a national level, the same restrictions and a certain level of harmonization, okay? For example, in Spain, something that we are doing is how to provide information to the citizens. It's also needed. If you are driving, you have to enter in a city, you need to know the restrictions. There is a platform that are going to collect information from cities to provide to the Google, Waze, and so on, to inform about the citizen what are the restrictions and the low emission zones. And finally, we need a strong political support to do that. That's my last point.
Yeah. Jordi, I see you nodding your head, and you also mentioned the Spanish climate change law. How do you see this in the case of Barcelona? Carlos also touched on the fact that people need to see the benefits, and the scheme should not be perceived as something that is designed just to collect money from them. How does the Spanish climate law support you in this? I mean, cities already have sustainable urban mobility plans. We have mayor strategies, as we've learned from London, that already announce and, let's say, give a lot of anticipation and prepare the ground for people, for the population, but also more generally for car owners about this. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely agree with Carlos. I think that a strong legal framework is key, is probably the most important thing in order to develop a low emission zone, in order to avoid what we are facing now in Barcelona, which is that we have doing again the same process to implement a low emission zone. Yes, in order to adapt this measure to the new Spanish climate change and energy transition, but you know, the problem is that a court don't like the low emission zone, and this is the truth. So that if you have a strong legal framework, maybe you will avoid this kind of problems. And only to add to what Carlos has said, I think it's important to have national guidelines in order to know how to deliver and to know how to regulate these low emission zones, because I have seen a question in the chat claiming that the case in small towns and small cities in the country. With the new Spanish climate change and energy transition, all municipalities in Spain with more than 50,000 inhabitants must do a low emission zone by 2023. So there is the case that not all the municipalities have the same, I don't know how to say that, the same capacity to implement a measure like Barcelona, Madrid, and biggest cities in the country. So maybe clear guidelines and regulations and about how to implement these measures could be great too.
Great.
And just another thing, here in Barcelona, I think that people now is more aware about that problem, and is easier to implement this kind of measures, because when we start in that, many people don't know why, and maybe what you said, it's only for money, so that's not true.
So a national legal framework can really set the ground also by getting people on board, by trying to change hearts and minds maybe in this matter. Ian, Bonnie, do the people in London, do the cities in Reveal encounter the same issues? Do the people in London love the congestion charge more than the people in Barcelona?
So, I mean, I think we should address this money question really. For low emission zones, I mean, they don't make any money, and indeed, our aim is not to make any money, because we want to aim for people to comply. We want the clean vehicles. We don't want the money. Where we do earn revenues through the congestion charge, and that by design and indeed by law, that money goes back into public transport services, primarily bus services, and that, I mean, that was always the deal and the policy, and that's been very successful. You know, we have increased, particularly in the central area where the congestion charge exists, the number of bus services, and we've seen, you know, a huge increase in ridership in the centre as well at the same time, as I said, investing in walking and cycling and the other alternatives. So it's absolutely key to provide those alternatives. That's for sure. But in terms of the public attitude, I think there's now a lot of awareness in London about the poor impacts of air quality on health and on the quality of life. and you know, it's all over the newspapers, it's all over the media, and you know, people support these measures in general. Now, that's not to say that, you know, absolutely everybody likes all the rules, because of course they don't. And you know, coming back to your point about, well, you know, we may see more low emission zones. I mean, we should remember that having low emission zones in the first place is actually an admission of failure. You know, it's a failure of national and European policy over years that led to this health and climate crisis that we have, and we've had to try and address it at local level through, you know, expensive and not universally popular schemes, you know, to try and do something about it. But you know, but the attitude of the population, I think, is changing, and there is, you know, a good deal of support for these measures these days.
I think that doesn't come just on its own either. It's my understanding also that Transport for London, or in London, that there were active campaigns to make people aware of the air quality. So that information needs to get out there. And I think part of this is the idea of getting acceptance. You get it more easily if people have the feeling that they're part of a shared goal, that this isn't just, the cities, you're just trying to keep my car out, you're just trying to make my life difficult, you're just trying to collect money from me. That the idea, and this, the communication part is so important, this understanding that we have a shared goal, which is better air quality, a safer place for our kids to be in cities, a quieter place to live. So all of these are clear, I think, goals that we need to put out there and say, as a city, this is what we're trying to achieve, and make sure that it's clear that people are on board. And I think, I mean, Jordi described this well, this communication process is really an important part of what they went through. And I have to say, when I looked at that, you said the negative part is that it costs money. Well, I mean, of course it costs money, but everything else does too. But why you should say that it's less important? Because I mean, you can't not do it. Otherwise, you're bound to fail. You have no other way around it. And I think these political communication aspects around this are so important. And I mean, most of these things have been said. I have a document in front of me. We were just finishing off our recommendations coming out of the Reveal project of 3 years. And a lot of what you've said already is sort of wrapped into this idea that you don't want to make money on this. In fact, you want to make it possible for people not to have to pay anything. That's what the goal is. And you also need to be able to communicate that. You say, I don't want your money. We want to, and this is one of our, what we call our cross-cutting aspects, is to, we started out calling it enforcement, but we ended up switching that to the idea of ensuring compliance, because it's not about enforcing something, it's about making it possible for people to comply with the rules that you're putting in place. And that is, like, you call them flanking measures, Ian, we call them complementary measures in Reveal. And of course, they're crucial, because if you don't have those, it's really difficult for people to actually comply with what you want them to do. And Luana talked about the ideas of the idea of carrots and sticks, because these are sticks that we're putting in place, but we need to make ways for people to get around that, so that you don't need to be hit by the stick, but you can certainly go around it by riding a bicycle or taking the bus or walking, or I don't know if you need a car, maybe it's electric.
Yeah, no, Bonnie, I'm totally with you on this. I think these complementary measures, and I mean, it's essentially offering people options. It's really offering people alternatives to get around safely, efficiently, and comfortably. Especially for those that are outside of the city area, who depend on their vehicle or who need their vehicle to get to their work, or to an essential service that the city holds. Hold that thought, Bonnie, because I just want to give Xavier a chance to also come in on this issue of national frameworks that can enable, if you have some thoughts around this, and then we can move again to this issue of engaging people.
Yeah, that's, I agree with the discussion you are having. So it's very complex, because, for example, if you see the questions, what we have is 90% of the people, for example, in Spain, is supporting the fight against the climate change. But then when you increase the price of the power supply because you have some markets for the CO2, then the people is arguing. So I think there is not doubt that here in Barcelona, since many years, the people is aware of the problem. Okay, but I would like to compare that with the smoking. So we cannot, the people knew from many years that the smoking was bad for the health. There is a point that there is a responsibility of the policy that even if some people is against, we have to reinforce because it's for the benefit of the health. Okay, so you don't expect the people, the smokers, to say, please close, forbid us to smoke in the restaurants. No, because we know that it is causing mortality. We have to forbid that. So I don't need that. We don't have to listen anybody, but please consider also this other side. Okay, and then there is also the option that when the people see what is the change of a 30% reduction of the cars, they like a lot, they are accepting more measures, okay? But this is what the measure of Stockholm did. In 2006, he made a test for 3 months of the congestion charge. And later on, they made a referendum and they won.
6
because
months.
the people saw what was the benefit. The same with Madrid Central. I remember seeing TV and the journalist trying to look for someone being against the measure, and nobody in the street was against the measure. So I think the best is doing trials for a few months, and then when the people see the change, they are more convinced, because we will have smokers always again to forbid smoking in the restaurant. But this has not to stop the law of forbidding smoking in restaurants.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
indeed.
totally agree. Yeah.
So I see everybody is in agreement. Bonnie, I interrupted you. You are muted. So
I thought I clicked the button. I just missed it.
Yeah, somebody had to do it. Yeah.
No, the one point anyway that we haven't touched on yet is dealing with, we'll say, vulnerable groups, people that might need exceptions. And Jordi gave the example of that. If people have, say, medical appointments or physical disabilities and they're not able to walk, or they need a car for whatever reason, then you need to have exceptions that are made for those groups. And that's what I would be curious to know about the groups that were involved in the stakeholder process, because there's a huge long list. There were a lot of acronyms there. But I would also like to know, did you actively go and talk to people that would be really adversely affected in a way that I would say is unjust? Because that's the one thing that we certainly found within Reveal, is you need to look for the people that would be really affected and find ways to help them. But on the other hand, how do we say this? Looking for people with really justifiable concerns, as opposed to people that just have a self-interest. So if I say, well, people who need a wheelchair need to get into the city center in a car, and so everybody needs to get into, so everybody can do it. This idea that, you know, the fact that one small group needs that doesn't mean that everybody gets it. It means you really need to focus on meeting the needs of those people while using your stick on others. So vulnerable groups, don't forget them.
Yeah, Bonnie, and I think Jordi gave some nice examples of the exemptions they have, which I think are also quite good to be widely communicated. But yeah, maybe going back to what you were saying, Xavier, about doing the right thing for public health, right? So I think it's really important also that we try and communicate maybe a bit more and a bit better also on the health benefits and the health impact that car transport has on us. And this is something that is almost always missing from the public debate, which is super polarized. It ends up to be an us versus them discussion. So there is still some more work to do on this to engage people and to convince them that walking and cycling is good for your health as well. It's some more work to be done there. Carlos, you've unmuted yourself.
Yeah, because in the Jordi presentation, he shows the benefits and the indicators of pollution in Barcelona, and he shows the limits, the new limits, of the WHO. And this is something that is going to happen. I don't know if Xavier can explain about this, because we are complying with the current limits that are 15 were defined 15 years ago or 17 years ago.
It was defined in 1999.
Or 20 years ago.
1999 was defined the limit value for PM10. It was to be changed according to the law. The 1st of January 2010, the first author directive said that the 1st of January, the limit values has to be replaced by the WHO guideline. But then in 2018, we postponed that to 2013. And then Mr. Juncker postponed that to 2020. And then the COVID postponed that to 2023. So next year, we will have new limit values. So many cities that are now in compliance will be not in compliance, not because they are more polluted, but because we are more challenging. But look at this. The WHO has changed twice the guidance, one in 2005 and the other in 2021, while the limit value has not been changed in 22 years.
In Europe, no? But only Europe.
In Europe, yeah, but countries like Sweden, like Switzerland, like other countries, they already replaced their national because the European standard was really very low challenging.
Yeah. So it is the case that cities go by the WHO limits because they are slightly more ambitious or they set their own limits, which are more appropriately leveled. So I think we're running out of time, actually. I'm just looking at the Q&A box. I see here a question about regularizing communication protocols. I think this is going in the direction of perhaps having more guidance on how to communicate as well about an access restriction. What are your thoughts on this? Is there anybody who would like to take this question?
Well, I think it's aligned with what I have said before. These guidelines should cover regulation in all topics, communication campaigns, and maybe guidance in terms of timetables, types of low emission zones, and in all types of information. It covers all, I think.
Yeah. So more support is needed from perhaps also the regional level, if not from the center. Yeah.
National level, or in Spain, for example, there is a standard is it's a norm, no? How to implement low emission zones.
Yeah.
It's the guide to implement. I think it's very useful.
Yeah. Bonnie?
Yeah, I just would say partly to that, I think there are differences from city to city depending on the size and all sorts of factors. So it's hard to have something really general But if I can just give a little promotional pitch, the one thing that we are just finishing up right now in Reveal is a tool that sort of helps cities to think about what steps they could take and what building blocks of access regulations might be appropriate for them, and also to think about the processes. It's going to be ready just in the next couple of weeks, but I think just this idea of thinking about what the pieces are that could fit together, what's appropriate if you're looking at an entire city or if you're looking at a neighborhood, what your goal is. So are you focusing on congestion reduction? Are you focusing on reducing air pollution? Are you on emissions? So you need to think about all those bits and pieces first, and then from that you might start to think about which access regulations might be appropriate for you.
Okay, I don't want to profit more from our generous audience who I see they are still with us. So I'm gonna quickly ask all of you in 30 seconds to give me, if you are to go on a desert island, what would be your key success factor for a successful implementation? There are many, I know, and it depends how you define success as well. But for implementing UVARs, what would you say is the most important thing for a city to be aware of? Ian, let's start with you.
Yeah, thanks. I think the most important thing is to be clear about what you're trying to achieve. I mean, you whether that's a sort of a specific emission reduction or a congestion reduction, you have to be clear about that, and you have to do the preparatory work, with the numbers behind that, based on modelling of traffic and the impacts of that, so that you are confident yourself about what that goal is. And then, as others have said, you have to absolutely have to communicate that, and indeed consult upon it, because there's always going to be the details which you haven't thought of, which you will need to address, whether it's vulnerable groups or others, as was also said. Thank you.
Xavier.
Yeah, in our discussion, what I would like is to have a clear explanation to the society that the non-technological measures are more effective than the technological measures, because everybody who is not working on that, they think, oh, electric cars, electric bus, hydrogen. No, this is an important piece of the puzzle, but will not solve the problem, and it's the non-technological measures. And then I would like to convince the people that we don't want the same city that we have with electric cars, congestion of electric cars, but a more healthy city. Air pollution is one of the parts, but also noise, and especially this the active, like Ian explained very well, these challenges, and Barcelona is doing very well also, the active transport that is increasing your health and reducing the cardiovascular risk. And then we want to sell healthy cities. Even mentally, if you make sports, you feel better. So selling the whole box with all the benefits, but clarifying that non-technological measures are more effective than electric cars and hydrogen.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Xavier, for this well-rounded answer. Bonnie.
I would just take all the people in the room here and bring them to the island with me. I think everything has been covered. The one thing that I would say maybe has been touched on but not explicitly focused on is the idea of counting and measuring, because you won't know what you've achieved if you don't know where you stand right now. So you really need to start counting and measuring as much as you can, so that you know where you are, and it's also helpful for your communications that you can say we've reduced by X%. But yeah, so it all comes back to communications, but you need to have something good to communicate to.
Great. Carlos and then Jordi.
Okay, from my side, I would suggest to use data, because there is a lot of data available. define objectives for the city in reduce congestion, pollution, what are the goals, and launch it and do it. Implement a trial with the citizens, demonstrate that it works, measuring KPIs and so on. It's the way to gain the acceptance of the citizens. I think it's the only way, because we need to gain the acceptance and convince the citizens that leave the car and use the public transportation, active mobility, and shared mobility is the future in cities, because cities are going to grow. We're talking about Madrid and Barcelona. We are going to be double in population in 2050. We are going to have less space for everyone. We need to do that.
Especially less space for cars.
For cars, yeah.
Jordi.
From my side, maybe the political agreement is the most important factor. And also to have clear ideas, also for political point of view, because for citizenship and stakeholders, it's necessary to give a clear, like a calendar, in order to know what kind of measures, what kind of ideas you have in order to reduce pollution at midterm or long term. I don't know, but maybe is what we need.
Thanks, Jordi. So I think this wraps up quite a complex and rich conversation, a rich discussion that at least I would like to continue it, but I'm very mindful we are already running quite late. So I want to thank you all for joining us. I want to thank the audience for staying with us until the end, for those who are still here. Very grateful again to our speakers, to our contributors to the report, and please go online and check out the full report. It's not too long, I promise. And from my side, yeah, I look forward to the next opportunity where we can meet and discuss UVAR. Spoiler alert, I can already tell you it's during Tomorrow Mobility in Barcelona between 15th and 17th of November. So do join us there if you can. So have a nice rest of the evening, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
See you.
Thank you.